Hey everybody, welcome back to Retro Modding News. I'm actually filming this video a week early because this weekend is Retro World and I'm going to be attending that. So there better not have been any news stories between last week and this week. This video is sponsored by PCBWay, but more on PCBWay later. Reventlow has created a Mark II of his N64 Junior 3D printed N64 shell. It's kind of hard to tell the difference unless you have one of the original N64 Juniors. Reventlow let me print one of these out for myself, so I just happen to have one handy. So it looks like the little notch in the front here is kind of flattened out, so there is no more notch in the front here anymore. It looks like the power button has a different style. It's more of like a toggle switch where you move it up and down instead of this like slide switch thing. And there's a new detail around the outside edge of the cartridge slot and the vent in the front. Other than that, from the picture, I can't really tell any differences between the original and this new version. I'm not sure if it's going to be actually physically larger or anything other than the notch cut out in the front here. But I don't know, I kind of like the new version. I like the fact that it is flat in the front instead of having that notch. Let me know what you think about this updated revision of the N64 Junior in the comments. Guess? I'm not really sure how you pronounce their name, but they've come up with a PS2 Slim internal BlueRetro adapter. And this is kind of a fully fledged BlueRetro adapter with features like wired controller detection so that it swaps the wireless controller to the other port. And it even has a console sleep and wake function like the Laser Bear GameCube BlueRetro adapter did. The project is called Methylene and I'm super impressed. This kind of came out of nowhere. And I ordered one of these boards, the version that doesn't come with the ESP32, because I have a lot of ESP32 dev boards kicking around. So it should be pretty easy for me to flash the firmware onto the ESP32 dev board and use my hot air gun to desolder the ESP32 and solder it onto the basic board. I actually reached out to Dan Kuntz about whether or not this would be compatible with the Retro Gem, and he thinks that it would be. Now, I'm not sure because both the Retro Gem and this Methylene have reset functionality, so I'm not sure if that's going to be conflicting at all, but the flex cables do seem to be able to fit on top of each other, so we'll just have to wait and see about that. I feel like 8BitDo has had a lot of awesome products lately. First they had the Neo Geo wireless controller, and now they have this PlayStation 1/PlayStation 2 Bluetooth adapter. So it's an external adapter, and it's not BlueRetro. It is the 8BitDo kind of framework, whatever they use. It supports a whole bunch of controllers, obviously all the ones that are Bluetooth, and more specifically PlayStation controllers, so like the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 controllers. I did even see somewhere that it would support the DualShock 3. Nope, I was wrong about that. It looks like it doesn't support the DualShock 3. This adapter is currently available. There's no pre-order for this, so if you want to support the channel, I'll leave an affiliate link in the description below. Retro Fighters has released a wireless Dreamcast controller called the Striker DC. Now, I have not typically liked Retro Fighters controllers really in the past. I only own the N64 controller and I have ordered the Xbox controller, which hasn't been shipped yet. So I am gonna hold my judgment on the Xbox one. But anyways, this wireless one looks kind of interesting because it does in fact support the VMU. It's actually kind of connected to the console with a little dongle thing. So I kind of like the look of the VMU in the controller, but I can understand because it's wireless, they probably can't support the amount of charge or something. I don't really know why they couldn't fit it in there. Maybe the battery's in the way or something. It only comes in two colors too, white and this kind of ice blue or something. So I think it's a really cool color. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really resemble the Dreamcast, the original Dreamcast controller that much. So it's not really on my radar. But if you do enjoy it and you want to pre-order the controller, I'll leave some affiliate links in the description below. I talked about Flippyboot in my last video, which is Crispyville's open source GameCube ODE, but I didn't know that they were trying to design it to be a solderless PCB. So there's this prototype here that Crispyville is showing off. It looks like there's some kind of a mount or something. I'm not exactly sure how they're pulling it off, but there's going to be some kind of low profile solderless Pico socket. So theoretically, this makes this mod super available for a lot of people. So it's basically going to be solder free, so it's plug and play. You don't have to do any soldering inside of the GameCube. You do have to take it apart, obviously, to get into the area where the drive is, but you shouldn't have to solder anything. And not only that, you shouldn't really have to mess around with attaching your own Raspberry Pi Pico. So if you do buy the Flippyboot from someone, you could probably make the cost lower to buy it if you already have some Raspberry Pi Picos lying around and you can just toss your own in without even having to solder it, which is pretty cool. It looks like they're trying to get it so that you can keep your original disk drive and use Flippyboot also. So here's this demo of Crispyville loading a game, but it looks also like the Flippy boot is in there. I don't know if that means there's going to be a little switch inside that you can switch back and forth, or maybe it's just going to be like automagic. Maybe there's going to be like some Swiss magic that makes it work. But yeah, Flippy boot seems like a really exciting ODE for the GameCube. I'm not sure if there was an official announcement, but it looks like CO is working with Gamebox to develop some of their new products. So here CO is posting about the DS Consolizer that they're working on. So let's take a look at this list of features to see what they're working on. Okay, so it looks like they ordered a prototype and they're hoping to show off a video of the prototype working by the end of next month. It looks like you'll be able to update the firmware through a USB Type-C cable, and it will be impossible to brick it, the Consolizer firmware. It looks like it will support the original DS and the DS Lite, so I'm not sure if that means two separate products or if they're somehow going to be able to make one product that will support both of those things. They're trying to go for a solderless install. Now, I think this means that they're going to try to use pogo pins, those like contact pins that kind of press down and you kind of clamshell the two boards together to get them to touch and communicate that way. Both of the DS screens will output to one HDMI source, so it's not like it's going to be two HDMI outputs to put to two different TVs. It looks like it's all going to be through one TV. That's kind of how the 3DS capture cards are. I mean, in the software, you can do all sorts of crazy things with it too, but I think the default output is like a stacked screen layout where the top screen is on the top and the bottom is on the bottom. Now it says minimum 480p HDMI output. Now I'm not sure if that means that they're trying to just get to the raw digital source and that way we can upscale them in the future with things like the RetroTink 4K. But it does say that they think they can achieve 1080p, so you know, that's kind of a bonus in my opinion right now. Touchscreen emulation will be performed by a controller. I don't know if that means it's gonna be like a cursor overlaid on top of it maybe. It will have an on-screen display and it will have some kind of in-game reset, which is kind of cool. And they're debating about whether to have GameCube controller support or Bluetooth controller support or both. He said that there's going to be a GBA macro screen mode. Does that mean that like they're going to try to get it some kind of an enclosure that you can hold it and use one of the screens or something? It says disable showing the top screen and adjust scale bottom screen on the TV. To me, that kind of sounds like this is going to be like built into an actual DS and not like gut a DS and put it in just a static thing that you put on your desk. And CO says that there's going to be one hidden feature that they haven't discussed and has not been on any other Consolizer before. I'm super excited for the DSHD. I hope they show off the prototype boards, even if they don't work or anything, just so that we can have some proof of life of this awesome project. If you've been keeping up with the retro scene for a long time, you remember the letters OSSC. Those are words I haven't said in a really long time, but when I think about the OSSC, I think about FirebrandX and FirebrandX's profiles. One of the most interesting parts about the OSSC was the fact that you could import profiles into them, custom profiles, optimal settings essentially for unique consoles that you can kind of quickly bring up and it would look really good for that one console. With the current RetroTink 5X, we kind of went away from that because there was a lot of automation things that happened in the 5X that meant that we didn't have to tweak that many things if we just wanted to get up in gaming. I know that Mike is packing a whole bunch of new settings into the RetroTink 4K, and if anyone should have a RetroTink 4K right now, it's FirebrandX. If he can come up with some awesome profiles that make the RetroTink 4K truly the best for each unique console that there is out there and provides that to you, so that all you have to do is put it on an SD card or something, put it in your RetroTink 4K, and off you go, because that means you'll get really, really good output, and you also won't have to spend time figuring out how the RetroTink 4K works. You can just pull in these profiles and off you go. I'm just kind of looking at FirebrandX's timeline, and he's got a whole bunch of gems. It looks like this is 9X NES, but I think later on somewhere he came up with this 10X profile for the NES and the SNES. So it looks like he already has 9 times and 10 times scaling NES and Super Nintendo profiles for the RetroTink 4K. It's one thing to know that the RetroTink 4K can do 4K output. It's another to know that it can do 9 times or 10 times. So basically we can say that this is the RetroTink 10X instead of just the 5X. It also looks like he has some Sega Genesis profiles as well that are both 9 and 10 times. So it looks like that's kind of be the cutoff for the RetroTink 4K is 9 and 10 times scaling. But I'm super excited for this. I'm super glad that FirebrandX is going to dedicate some time to do this. He has a Patreon link pinned on the top of his Twitter account, so if you want to support him and give back for all the hard work that he's going to do with this, then I highly recommend that. Somebody in my Discord let me know that there was this post on Reddit where this user was having issues with their GCLoader, the Hardware Revision 2 GCLoader, not booting at all, or not having problems with their new GCLoader. It was saying this, an error occurred message or something, and it wouldn't load. I guess long story short, this user solved it by using a different SD card. Now, to me, I don't necessarily know if that's like a perfect solution or anything, but I had just heard about these cases where people were having issues with GCLoaders, and it might have been caused by some specific SD cards and their compatibility with it. Dan didn't say anything on Twitter, either on his personal Twitter account or on the Black Dog Tech Twitter account, that there was a solution, a known solution. He had figured out some problem with the hardware version 2 and that he had helped people who were having problems already. It looks like the problem is caused by specific GameCube power supplies. They have this slower rise time or something, which causes an issue with the hardware revision 2 GCLoaders that are exacerbated by certain SanDisk SD cards. And SanDisk is probably one of the more common kinds, so it's probably pretty common that somebody might have that, and the power supply that has the slower rise time issue. Dan has a couple of solutions. You can either install a 4.7U cap on the RTS pin to ground, which you could probably barely see it in my video here, but there's this ESP32 in the bottom left, and there's this little tiny itty bitty capacitor soldered between the leg and the shield of the ESP32. So that's not easy soldering. So if anybody who's buying a GCLoader, they are probably buying it, more often than not, they're probably buying that because they want a no solder ODE for GameCube. So there's probably no way in heck that they're going to be doing this themselves. You know, I'm sure some people will probably try it. He says that you can also use a lower value resistor somewhere else, but they're 04, 02 size, which is pretty smaller. Or you can try different SD cards, so probably a brand that's not SanDisk. The thing that's important to know is if you are having problems with your hardware revision 2 GCLoader, I probably would not attempt a manual solder fix. Even if you are capable of doing the soldering, I would reach out to Dan and have him fix it for you. Because he mentioned here that if you're having problems with booting, and he mentions there's certain cases, right? So if you're already booting into Swiss, then that means it's not this issue here. If you can get into Swiss, then that means this is not your problem. But he will take care of you if you reach out to him. And I think that you probably should do that, just for not liability, but just so he can keep track of the number of cases that this is happening to. He told me personally that this only had happened to 7 people, but I think it's probably more than that, more than 7 people this is affecting. Because there's probably a bunch of people that got the GCLoader and then just threw that thing in a bin. As soon as they realized that, oh man, now I've got to take apart my GameCube, they probably didn't do it right away. So there's probably people who have them who may have eventually ran into this issue because they might have had the specific power supply issue and SanDisk SD cards, which is pretty common. So anyways, my recommendation to you is reach out to Dan and he'll take care of you. This next section is kind of speculation, but there's a couple of Twitter posts kind of all lumped together. And it kind of started with this post from Electron Shepherd. Electron Shepherd is the developer of the Wii to HDMI and Xbox to HDMI external HDMI adapters for both of those consoles. He posted this bin of Super Nintendos. There's a Super Famicom, there's a Super Nintendo Junior, and an N64. Now, when I saw this bin, other than my immediate gut reaction to how gross and yellow that Famicom is, I thought, what do all these consoles have in common? And that thing is a multi-out. So if I were to speculate, and I don't have any insider information or anything, I literally just saw this photo and had a thought in my head about why would Electron Shepherd post a picture with all consoles in a bin that all have multi-outs. I just kind of figured that maybe they're working on a multi-out to HDMI, external HDMI adapter. Again, that's super speculation, but I think it's totally possible and a totally convenient thing for people to have in the future, especially with 4K scalers coming out. Maybe you're planning to switch completely over to HDMI consoles only in your setup, and having a plug-and-play HDMI solution for all these consoles would be pretty cool. But it doesn't really end there, because Bahamut Fan, I'm not really sure what they're responding to in this screenshot, but they said that there aren't any HDMI mods yet for the Super Nintendo / NES. And then MKII said, yeah, like alluding to something that they were working on or something. And then I remembered that MKII had already developed something for the multi-out, and that was the RetroTink 5X Direct, which were these, I guess they were kind of like RetroTink 5X caliber devices that were unique for specific consoles. And I don't think they ever really released. I think maybe a few are out there in the wild, but they were going to be a series of these individual console to HDMI adapters that had the similar hardware to the RetroTink 5X. Now, I'm not sure if they didn't come out because maybe Mike wanted to hyper-focus on just the RetroTink 5X, and maybe they didn't have enough parts to spread around to all these other devices. So that kind of makes sense to me. But it might be a good time now to release at least the multi-out version of this, because that would enable a lot of people just to hook up Super Nintendo or N64 or something to the RetroTink 4K through HDMI if you're going for a whole HDMI setup. And just to kind of top this Super Nintendo HDMI mod section off, Dan Kuntz from PixelFX mentioned that they're going to work on a gem version for the Super Nintendo, which is pretty exciting. I think that Super Nintendo is kind of due for an HDMI mod, and even the NES too. I really think that NES also could do with an HDMI mod. So tons of HDMI mods for the Super Nintendo happening at once, so we'll just have to see which one pans out and how good they are. I talk a lot about open source retro console mods on the channel, and that's where PCBWay comes in. All you have to do is upload the Gerber files to PCBWay, and they'll produce the PCB that you can assemble yourself. They even have 3D printing services too, so if the project that you're working on requires 3D printed parts and you don't have a 3D printer of your own, they've got you covered. They even have CNC and injection molding services if you're a mod developer looking to create a professional looking product. Thanks again to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. You can find out more by visiting the link in the video description. For the big story this month, PixelFX has finally announced their Morph upscaler, and not only that, it is the Morph 4K. I know that we talked, I actually talked with Dan in CO's Retro Space about whether or not there is going to be a 4K version of the Morph, because they teased it kind of in the RetroGem video. But I saw from Woozle in the PixelFX Discord that they actually pivoted to 4K over a year ago. So I think that they just didn't want to say anything in the RetroGem / the CO Twitter space that we had yet about the 4K, because this was announced after that video. Now, I'm pretty disappointed in the PixelFX website because it doesn't support my half 1080p screen. That's how I normally capture the screenshots over here on the left, is I just have it half width, and their website doesn't like that, so that's kind of sucky. Anyway, so let's look at the features. There's going to be two versions of the Morph 4K. There's going to be a, I guess, base version, which is like an all digital version, and then there's going to be a 4K plus analog version, which is going to be digital plus an analog input. The base or digital only version is going to be $400. There is a special pricing of $375 if you get this early bird pricing. And the analog version is going to be $100 extra. Okay, so let's look at the feature list of the digital version. So it says it supports 4K 60 with polyphase upscaling. Not sure what polyphase means. It supports 444 color output, so it's not going to have any chroma subsampling or anything. It does support HDR, variable refresh rate, and black frame insertion, which are kind of big features from the RetroTink 4K, which help to enable the like CRT emulation effects that I'm really excited for. I watched the My Life in Gaming live stream where they talked about the 4K CRT emulation stuff, and it seems really awesome. I'll have more information about that later, and I do plan to do reviews of both these products, so you'll hear about that in the future. It says scan lines. It doesn't really say anything about slot mask emulation or anything. I'm probably certain that it's going to be more than just scan lines, but we'll have to see. Now, one of the biggest features that I think is cool is that it will have the PixelFX OSD and supporting Wi-Fi updating of firmware. That's one of the things I don't like about the RetroTink 5X, is that I have to unplug it and plug it into my computer and then remember what the name of the firmware update utility thing is that Mike made every time, because I don't do it that often. So having Wi-Fi updates, I think, is a really good feature. And a web UI system, so I don't know if that means like I'll be able to be sitting here on my computer playing games or whatever, or like have it on my monitor and then go over to a browser and then be able to select different things and like change different settings here without having to get up. That's another thing. I absolutely hate the controller, the remote for the RetroTink 5X. So if I can mess with the settings here and keep my morph or whatever in the background over there, then I think that would be really cool. And then it has this expansion card support, which I think is part of the analog version, which we'll talk about below. Okay, so it looks like the HDMI version is only going to have well, it has 2 HDMI ports, so one input and then one output, I think. I don't think it will support multiple HDMI inputs. From the pictures, it looks like you should be able to, okay, yeah, it does say can be upgraded with the analog bridge at any point. So if you do buy the base or digital version of this, you can add an analog board in the future. So don't feel bad if you just want to buy the $400 digital version and then upgrade to an analog one in the future. Now the analog version is actually versions because there's this modular analog input in the back. It might be super hard for you guys to see this. Maybe I can like make it bigger here. There's multiple different versions of this analog bridge. This top one looks like it has VGA input and then RCA component input here. Maybe optical audio input. And then maybe a 3.5mm headphone jack, probably for left and right audio. So you could do kind of either or for audio. Then this next one is just a bunch of BNC cables for RGB and maybe horizontal vertical sync separated out. Then there's a version that has SCART input and component. So is that different? I think it might just be the colors. I can't really tell. Why is this green different than that green in the picture? I don't know. It's coming across kind of weird. But anyway, so I think these are both component, but this is probably the optimal one for me. SCART and then fully broken out with no need for a 3.5mm headphone jack thing for audio for component. So that would be good for your HD Retrovision cables. And if you have any older SCART cables and you want to use those, you can hook everything up to this. So I'm not exactly sure when you buy the analog, I don't know which bridges you're going to get. Like, do you get all the bridges or do you have to pick one? If you only get one for $100 extra, I don't really see the cost, the benefit of that. I mean, that just kind of seems like a lot of money, but you know, we'll have to see, because if you get all 4 of these and you can swap them out for the $100, then that's awesome. And I also heard from Dan that he plans to make the analog bridge PCB thing open source in the sense that people can make their own. So if you do want to have someone like maybe PCBWay or whatever make the analog boards, you can have them made and then put them together yourself, which is kind of a cool soldering project. If you're getting into soldering, that seems like a kind of interesting project. So I'm honestly excited about this also. I know that the RetroTink 4K is coming out, but I think this is a great time for retro, for there to be 2 competing upscalers of a high level. I know we've had some things like the GBSC sprinkled in there, and the OSSC is kind of still relevant, but we haven't really had a scaler war since the FrameMeister and the OSSC. It has been a very long time since that's been a thing. So I'm hoping to do some comparisons of both the 4K or the Morph 4K and the RetroTink 4K, and just price to performance, because that's the key here. It already, we don't exactly know what the RetroTink 4K is going to cost yet, but Mike Chi said, plan for $1,000. So even if it's $800, that is double what this is going to be. So we'll just have to see when these both come out, how they both perform. If you want to know my thoughts about the Dan Koontz drama around this, I'm not going to talk about it in this video. I did talk about it in a live stream that I did a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to know what I think about that, then I'll leave a timestamped link in the description. That's it for this video, but check out this video if you want to learn about the PixelFX Retro Gem. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.